What happens when the most feared warrior race in the galaxy discovers that humans possess something far more dangerous than any weapon? When Princess Zara of the mighty Kethmoran Empire first laid eyes on Captain Marcus Chen during the peace negotiations, she expected to see the savage brute her people's propaganda had painted humans to be. Instead, she found herself staring into eyes that held depths of emotion her telepathic mind couldn't comprehend. The Kethmoran had conquered 17 star systems with their superior technology and ruthless efficiency. They had never encountered a species that could make them feel vulnerable. But humans had a weapon the galaxy had never seen before: the ability to love unconditionally, to show mercy to their enemies, and to change hearts with nothing more than genuine compassion. This is the story of how one human's unwavering devotion broke through centuries of conditioning, shattered an empire's cruel traditions, and proved that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through force, but through the simple act of seeing someone's true worth. When love collides with duty, when tradition faces transformation, and when a single look can change the fate of civilizations, this is where our story begins. The crystalline walls of the Kethmoran flagship Sovereign's Edge hummed with contained energy as Princess Zara stood before the massive viewport, watching the small human transport vessel approach. Her forearms were clasped behind her back in the traditional pose of imperial authority, but beneath her composed exterior, something felt different. Wrong, even. For 3 cycles, the human fleet had held their ground against the might of the Kethmoran Empire. Not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through something her military advisors couldn't quantify. They called it tactical unpredictability, but Zara suspected it was something far more complex. The transport docked with a gentle vibration that rippled through the deck plating. Zara's telepathic abilities, enhanced by generations of selective breeding, automatically reached out to probe the minds of the approaching delegation. What she encountered made her stumble backward in shock. Where Kethmoran minds were ordered hierarchies of duty, honor, and conquest, the human minds were chaotic. Emotions swirled like stellar storms, thoughts layered upon memories in patterns that defied logic. And, beneath it all, something she had no word for in her language pulsed like a second heartbeat. The airlock hissed open, and 5 humans stepped aboard her flagship. Zara's breath caught in her throat as her eyes fixed on their leader. He was smaller than she had expected, standing barely 7 feet tall compared to her 8-foot frame. His skin was a warm brown that seemed to glow under the ship's lighting, and his hair was cropped short in a practical style. But it was his eyes that froze her in place. They were dark, almost black, and, when they met hers, she felt something she had never experienced in her 43 years of life. The human didn't flinch at her presence, didn't show the fear or hostility she was accustomed to seeing in conquered species. Instead, there was curiosity? Respect? Something else entirely? "Your Highness," the human said, offering what she recognized as their species' gesture of greeting. "I am Captain Marcus Chen, representing the Terran Coalition. Thank you for agreeing to these negotiations." His voice was steady, confident but not arrogant. Zara found herself studying the way his mouth moved when he spoke, the subtle expressions that played across his features. Her tutors had taught her that humans were simple creatures driven by base instincts, little better than the primitive species they had easily conquered in the Outer Rim. But this human spoke with intelligence and carried himself with dignity that rivaled her own court nobles. "Captain Chen," she replied, her voice carrying the authority of her royal bloodline. "I am Princess Zara Kethmoran, first daughter of the Eternal Throne, commander of the 7th Fleet." She paused, studying his reaction. Most species cowered when faced with her full titles. This human simply nodded respectfully. "The honor is mine, Princess," Marcus said, and something in his tone made her believe he meant it. The formal introductions continued as the other humans were presented. Zara learned their names and positions, but her attention kept drifting back to their captain. There was something about the way he stood, protective but not threatening, aware but not paranoid. When one of her own guards shifted aggressively, she noticed how Marcus positioned himself slightly in front of his smaller companions without making it obvious. "Shall we proceed to the conference chamber?" Zara asked, gesturing toward the corridor that led deeper into her ship. As they walked, Zara found herself stealing glances at the human captain. He moved with fluid efficiency, his attention taking in details of the ship's design and security measures, but not in the calculating way of a potential saboteur. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in the engineering and craftsmanship. "Your ship is magnificent," Marcus commented, running his fingers along the smooth crystalline wall. "The energy distribution patterns are unlike anything in our databases. The way you've integrated organic and synthetic materials is remarkable." Zara felt her secondary heart skip a beat. In all her experience with conquered species, none had ever shown appreciation for Kethmoran engineering. They were usually too terrified or too resentful to notice such details. But this human spoke with genuine admiration, as if he could see the years of research and development that had gone into every surface. "You understand engineering?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Some," Marcus replied with a modest smile that did strange things to Zara's internal equilibrium. "I started as an engineering officer before moving to command. There's poetry in good design, don't you think?" Poetry. Zara's mind reeled. Her species had abandoned such frivolous concepts millennia ago in favor of pure efficiency and military doctrine. Yet something about the way this human described her ship's design resonated with a part of her she thought had been bred out of her bloodline generations ago. They entered the conference chamber, a circular room with a holographic display table at its center. Zara took her position on the raised dais reserved for Imperial family, while the humans arranged themselves on the lower level. The symbolism was intentional and unmistakable, yet Marcus's demeanor showed no sign of feeling diminished by the arrangement. "Before we begin formal negotiations," Zara said, activating the recording protocols, "I must understand something about your species. Our intelligence reports are conflicting." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his attention focused entirely on her. "What would you like to know?" "Your fleet has been outgunned from the beginning. Our technology is superior, our numbers greater, our experience in warfare spans millennia. Yet you continue to resist. Logic dictates that you should have surrendered after the first engagement. What drives your species to such illogical behavior?" For a moment, Marcus was quiet, and Zara could sense the complex thought processes occurring behind those dark eyes. When he finally spoke, his words were careful but sincere. "We've learned that some things are worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. Our freedom, our way of life, the right to choose our own destiny. These aren't just abstract concepts to us, Princess. They're part of who we are." "Freedom," Zara repeated the word slowly. In Kethmoran, the closest translation was a term used to describe the behavior of defective machinery. "Your freedom serves no purpose if you are dead. With respect, Your Highness, a life without the freedom to choose isn't really living at all." The conviction in his voice sent an unexpected shiver through Zara's nervous system. She had been raised to believe that purpose came from service to the Empire, that individual desires were weaknesses to be overcome. Yet this human spoke of freedom as if it were as essential as oxygen. "Tell me about your world," she heard herself saying, departing from the prepared negotiation script. "What is Earth like?" Marcus's expression softened, and, for a moment, the formal atmosphere in the room seemed to dissolve. "It's diverse. Beautiful in ways that are hard to describe. We have vast oceans that reflect the sky like liquid mirrors, mountains that reach toward the stars, forests where sunlight filters through leaves in patterns that change with the seasons." As he spoke, images formed in Zara's mind, not from her telepathic abilities but from the vivid way he described his homeworld. She had seen dozens of conquered planets, most stripped of their resources and converted to serve imperial needs. But the way Marcus described Earth suggested a world where beauty existed for its own sake, where diversity was celebrated rather than eliminated. "Seasons?" she asked, unfamiliar with the concept. "The way our planet's axis tilts means that different regions experience changes throughout our year. Spring, when everything grows and renews itself. Summer, when the warmth brings abundance. Autumn, when the leaves change colors in preparation for winter's rest. Each season has its own beauty, its own purpose." Zara tried to imagine a world where change was natural rather than imposed, where different regions developed unique characteristics rather than conforming to a single standard. Kethmoran worlds were terraformed for maximum efficiency, their climates controlled and standardized. The idea of natural variation was almost incomprehensible. "You speak of your world as if it were alive," she observed. "In many ways, it is. Everything is connected. The forests breathe in what we breathe out. The oceans regulate our climate. The smallest insects play crucial roles in the ecosystem. We've learned that when we take care of our world, it takes care of us. The concept of mutual care struck Zara like a physical blow. Kethmoran doctrine taught that the strong took from the weak, that resources existed to be exploited, that the natural order was one of dominance and submission. But this human described a relationship based on reciprocity and respect. And your families, she found herself asking. How do you organize your social structures? Marcus smiled again, and Zara realized she was beginning to anticipate that expression, to look forward to the way it transformed his features. We have many different family structures, but the foundation is usually love and mutual support. Parents raise children not to serve a predetermined role, but to discover their own talents and interests. Couples choose each other based on compatibility and affection rather than genetic optimization or political advantage. Choose? The word came out sharper than Zara intended. In her society, mating contracts were arranged by the Imperial Genetics Board to ensure optimal offspring. The idea that individuals could simply select their own partners seemed dangerously chaotic. Yes, Marcus said gently, as if sensing her confusion. We believe that when people choose to be together freely, their bond is stronger than any arrangement imposed by others. Zara's mind raced with the implications. If humans chose their own mates, their own occupations, their own beliefs, how did their society function? Where was the order, the hierarchy, the clear chain of command that prevented chaos? How do you maintain stability, she asked. Without central control, without predetermined roles, how do you prevent your society from fragmenting? We work together, Marcus replied simply. We've found that when people are free to pursue their own interests, they often discover ways to contribute that no central authority could have predicted. Innovation comes from diversity, from different perspectives solving problems in unexpected ways. The hours passed without Zara realizing it as the formal negotiations transformed into something more like a cultural exchange. Marcus answered her questions with patience and thoughtfulness, never seeming annoyed by her curiosity or confused by her lack of understanding about human concepts. In return, Zara found herself sharing details about Kethmoran society that she had never discussed with outsiders. She told him about the intricate hierarchies that governed every aspect of their civilization, the genetic modifications that had enhanced their telepathic abilities, the centuries-long campaigns that had expanded their empire across the stars. It sounds lonely, Marcus said quietly when she finished describing the isolation required to maintain telepathic discipline. Lonely? Zara struggled with the translation. I am surrounded by thousands of crew members, advisors, guards. But, are any of them friends? Marcus asked. People you can be yourself with, without the titles and formality? Zara opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. In her entire life, every relationship had been defined by duty, hierarchy, genetic compatibility, or political necessity. She had never considered the possibility of connections based purely on mutual affection and understanding. Friends, she repeated slowly. You have such relationships? My crew, Marcus said, glancing at his companions who had remained respectfully quiet during their extended conversation. They're not just fellow officers. They're people I trust, people I care about beyond their professional capabilities. We share meals, stories, concerns. We support each other through difficult times and celebrate together during good ones. But, how can you maintain proper command discipline if you allow such emotional entanglements? We've found that people fight harder for leaders they respect and care about than for those they simply fear, Marcus explained. Trust builds stronger bonds than intimidation. As the formal session time drew to a close, Zara realized that nothing had gone according to her expectations. She had intended to demonstrate Kethmoran's superiority, to show these humans the futility of their resistance, to negotiate their surrender from a position of overwhelming strength. Instead, she found herself questioning concepts she had never thought to examine, considering possibilities that had never occurred to her, feeling things that had no place in the disciplined mind of a Kethmoran princess. Captain Shen, she said as the humans prepared to return to their transport, would you be willing to continue these discussions? There is much about your species that requires further study. Marcus nodded, and his smile seemed different now, warmer somehow. I would be honored, Princess. Perhaps next time you could visit our ship? Experience human hospitality? The suggestion should have been impossible to consider. A member of the imperial family venturing onto an enemy vessel was not only unprecedented but potentially treasonous. Yet as Zara looked into Marcus's eyes, she found herself saying, I will consider it. As the humans departed, Zara stood alone in the conference chamber, her mind spinning with new concepts and unfamiliar emotions. For the first time in her life, she questioned whether strength truly came from dominance, whether order required oppression, whether her people's way was the only way. And, deep in her chest, something she had no name for stirred to life, warm and frightening and wonderful all at once. She pressed her hand to her primary heart, feeling its rapid rhythm, and wondered if this was what the humans called hope. Outside the viewport, the human fleet maintained its position, no longer looking like a collection of primitive vessels to be easily swept aside. Instead, they seemed like something far more dangerous than any weapon her people had ever faced. They looked like the beginning of change. 3 days had passed since the first meeting, and Princess Zara found herself staring at her reflection in the polished metal surface of her private quarters. The face looking back at her was the same one she had seen every day for 43 years, elegant features marked by the subtle ridges that indicated noble birth, eyes the color of deep space, skin with the faint luminescence that came from generations of genetic enhancement. Yet somehow, everything felt different. She touched her throat, where the ceremonial collar of her rank rested against her skin. The metal felt heavier than usual, its weight a reminder of duties and expectations that had once seemed as natural as breathing. Now they felt like chains. Your Highness, came the voice of her personal advisor, Kethran, through the communication grid. The High Command wishes to review the negotiation transcripts. Zara's stomach clenched. The conversation with Marcus Chen had wandered far from the approved diplomatic protocols. She had revealed more about Kethmoran society than intelligence regulations permitted, and, worse, she had shown curiosity about human culture that could be interpreted as weakness. I will review them first, she replied, activating her personal workstation. Schedule the meeting for this evening. The transcripts materialized before her in holographic form, each word preserved in crystalline clarity. As she read through them, Zara realized how the conversation must appear to her superiors. Where she remembered a fascinating exchange of ideas, they would see a dangerous deviation from imperial doctrine. But it was the personal recordings from her own memory implants that truly disturbed her. Standard Kethmoran neural conditioning was designed to filter out emotional responses during official duties, maintaining the clarity of thought necessary for imperial business. Yet as she reviewed her memories of the meeting, they were saturated with feelings she barely understood. The way Marcus had smiled when describing Earth's seasons. The genuine interest in his voice when he asked about Kethmoran engineering. The complete absence of fear or hatred in his mental emanations, replaced by something warm and welcoming that her telepathic abilities couldn't properly categorize. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see the tactical display showing an incoming communication from the human fleet. Marcus Chen's face appeared on her screen, and Zara felt that strange flutter in her chest again. Princess Zara, he said, offering the same respectful gesture as before. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Captain Chen, she replied, struggling to maintain the formal tone appropriate for interspecies communications. What is the purpose of this contact? I wanted to follow up on our conversation about visiting our ship. I know it's an unusual request, but I believe it might help us understand each other better. Zara found herself leaning forward, drawn by the sincerity in his voice. Such a visit would be unprecedented. The security concerns alone. I understand, Marcus said quickly. But perhaps we could arrange a compromise? A neutral meeting location? There's an abandoned mining station about 6 hours from our current position. Our ships could maintain safe distances while we continue our discussions. The suggestion was reasonable from a military standpoint, but Zara knew it would never be approved through official channels. High Command viewed any unsupervised contact with enemy forces as potentially treasonous. Yet something in her rebelled against the thought of letting this opportunity slip away. I will consider it, she said, the same words she had used 3 days ago. Thank you, Princess. That's all I can ask. As the communication ended, Zara made a decision that would have horrified her former self. She began composing a personal message to Marcus, using encrypted channels that wouldn't be monitored by her security detail. The mining station designation XK7 had been abandoned for over 50 standard years, its mineral resources exhausted and its strategic value negligible. It was exactly the kind of location that would normally be beneath the notice of Imperial forces, which made it perfect for an unofficial meeting. Zara's personal shuttle was a marvel of Kethmoran engineering, capable of near-instantaneous travel across vast distances. As she piloted it toward the rendezvous coordinates, she told herself this was merely an extended intelligence-gathering operation. She needed to understand human psychology better if she was going to negotiate effectively for their surrender. But, even as she rehearsed this justification, she knew it was a lie. The truth was simpler and more complicated than any military objective. She wanted to see Marcus Chen again. The mining station appeared on her sensors as a collection of interconnected modules drifting in the void between two dead planets. Scans showed minimal power in the environmental systems and basic life support, enough to support a few hours of occupation but nothing that could sustain a long-term presence. Marcus's shuttle was already docked when she arrived. Unlike the utilitarian efficiency of Kethmoran design, the human vessel showed signs of personalization, decorative elements that served no functional purpose, asymmetrical modifications that suggested individual creativity rather than standardized construction. She found Marcus waiting for her in what had once been the station's central hub, a large chamber with viewports offering panoramic views of space. He had removed his formal uniform jacket and stood in simple dark clothing that somehow made him seem more approachable. "Thank you for coming," he said, moving toward her with that fluid grace she had noticed before. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Zara admitted, then immediately wondered why she had shared such a personal truth with this human. "What changed your mind?" The question hung in the air between them. Zara could have given any number of diplomatic answers, could have maintained the professional distance appropriate for enemy negotiations. Instead, she found herself speaking from a place she hadn't known existed. "Curiosity," she said. "You spoke of things I had never considered. I find myself wanting to understand more." Marcus smiled, and again Zara felt that strange warmth spread through her chest. Curiosity is a wonderful thing. It's what drives us to grow, to learn, to become more than we were. They moved toward the large viewport, where the distant stars provided a backdrop for their conversation. In the low light of the station's emergency systems, the formal barriers between them seemed to dissolve. "Tell me about your family," Zara said suddenly. "You mentioned choosing partners based on affection. What is that like?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I was married once. Her name was Elena. We met during our academy training, became friends first, then something more. She was brilliant, funny, could make me laugh even in the worst circumstances." "Was?" Zara caught the past tense, and something in Marcus's expression made her chest tighten. "She died 3 years ago," Marcus said quietly. "Ship malfunctioned during a routine patrol. I was supposed to be on that mission, but she volunteered to take my place because she knew I was exhausted from back-to-back assignments." Zara felt something she had no word for, a deep ache that seemed to resonate in her very bones. In Kethmoran society, the loss of a genetic partner was recorded as a statistical event, processed through grief counselors, and resolved through reassignment to a new breeding contract. But the pain in Marcus's voice suggested something far more profound. "You loved her," she said, using the human word that had no direct translation in her language. "More than my own life," Marcus confirmed. "She used to say that love wasn't about possession or genetic compatibility or political advantage. It was about choosing to put someone else's happiness before your own, every day, even when it was difficult." "And you still feel this, love? Even though she is gone?" "Always," Marcus said simply. "Love doesn't end with death. The relationship changes, but the feeling remains. She's part of who I am." Zara struggled to process this concept. Kethmoran mental conditioning was designed to prevent such lasting attachments, understanding them as potential sources of weakness that could compromise duty and efficiency. Yet Marcus spoke of his continued love for a dead mate as if it were a strength rather than a handicap. Does it not interfere with your duties? This emotional attachment to someone who can no longer serve any practical purpose? Marcus turned to look at her directly, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. She serves the most important purpose of all. She reminds me what I'm fighting for. Not just human freedom in the abstract, but the right for people to form these connections, to choose love over convenience, to build families based on affection rather than obligation. But, if love causes such pain when lost, why choose it at all? Would it not be more logical to avoid such attachments? Would it be more logical to avoid eating because you might someday go hungry? To avoid breathing because the air might someday become poison? Marcus shook his head. Love isn't logical, princess. It's necessary. Without it, we're just biological machines following our programming. Zara felt a shock of recognition at his words. Wasn't that exactly what her people had become? Biological machines optimized for conquest and efficiency, their capacity for individual emotion bred out in favor of collective purpose? What about you? Marcus asked gently. Have you ever loved someone? The question should have been impossible to answer. Kethmoran nobles didn't discuss their personal relationships with enemy combatants. Yet Zara found herself considering it seriously, examining her own experiences in light of what Marcus had described. I don't think so, she said slowly. I have had genetic partners selected for optimal offspring. I have professional relationships with colleagues and subordinates. I have duty relationships with family members. But, this thing you call love. I'm not certain I would recognize it. What does it feel like when you're with someone whose company you enjoy? Marcus asked. Zara thought immediately of their previous conversations, the way she had lost track of time, the strange lightness she felt when Marcus smiled. There is a warmth. A sense of anticipation. Time seems to pass differently. I find myself wanting to know more about them, to share things I normally keep private. Marcus nodded slowly. That sounds like the beginning of love to me. The beginning? Zara felt her secondary heart skip a beat. You think I am capable of such feelings? I think every sentient being is capable of love, princess. It might be suppressed or discouraged or bred out, but it's part of what makes us truly alive. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars whirl slowly past the viewport. Zara found herself studying Marcus's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair caught the dim light, the gentle curve of his mouth. When he turned and caught her looking, she expected to feel embarrassment. Instead, she felt only a deeper warmth. May I ask you something personal? Marcus said. You may ask, Zara replied, not promising to answer. Are you happy? In your life, with your role, with the path your society has chosen? The question struck her like a physical blow. Happiness was not a concept that featured prominently in Kethmoran philosophy. Satisfaction in duty, pride in achievement, contentment in order, these were the emotional states her people aspired to. But, happiness? I have never considered the question, she said honestly. Happiness is not something we are taught to pursue. What would make you happy? Marcus asked. Zara found herself thinking of their conversations, of the way her mind felt expanded by new ideas, of the strange sense of connection she felt when talking with this human. But, such thoughts were dangerous, treasonous even. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe that's something worth exploring, Marcus said gently. As they talked through the hours, Zara discovered that happiness might be found in simple things she had never appreciated. The way Marcus listened without judgment. The sound of his laughter when she described some of the more absurd imperial protocols. The feeling of being seen not as a princess or a political entity, but as an individual person with thoughts and feelings worth considering. When it came time to return to their ships, Zara felt an unexpected reluctance to leave. The prospect of returning to her formal duties, her ceremonial isolation, her predetermined role in the imperial machinery suddenly seemed unbearable. Captain Chan, she said as they prepared to part. These meetings, they are changing how I see things. I'm not certain that's appropriate for someone in my position. Marcus paused at the airlock to his shuttle. Change isn't always comfortable, Princess. But, without it, we never become who we're meant to be. And, who am I meant to be? That's something only you can decide, he replied. But, I suspect you're capable of far more than your society has allowed you to imagine. As Zara piloted her shuttle back toward the Kethmoran fleet, she felt as if she were carrying dangerous cargo. Not weapons or contraband, but ideas that threatened everything she had been taught to believe about duty, honor, and the natural order of the universe. Her personal quarters felt smaller when she returned, the ceremonial decorations more oppressive. She found herself standing before her mirror again, but now the face looking back seemed like a stranger's. Or perhaps, for the first time, it looked like her own. The communication request came just as she was preparing for the evening briefing with High Command. Marcus's face appeared on her private screen, and, despite everything she had been taught about appropriate emotional responses, Zara smiled. I wanted to thank you for today, he said. I know it wasn't easy for you to meet like this. It was illuminating, Zara replied carefully. There's something I wanted to ask you, Marcus continued. My crew is planning a cultural celebration tomorrow evening. Nothing formal, just food and music and stories. Would you consider joining us? Not as a princess negotiating with enemies, just as yourself? The invitation was impossible. Unprecedented. Completely inappropriate by every standard of imperial conduct. Yes, Zara heard herself say. I would like that very much. After the communication ended, she sat in her quarters staring at her hands. These were the hands that had signed conquest orders, that had worn the ceremonial gloves of imperial authority, that had been shaped by generations of breeding to serve the empire's needs. But, tonight, for the first time, they felt like they might belong to someone else entirely. Someone who had the right to make her own choices, to pursue her own happiness, to discover who she might become if she were free to choose. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with something she was beginning to recognize as hope. The human vessel Harmony's dream was nothing like what Princess Zara had expected. As her shuttle docked with the converted exploration ship, she prepared herself for the cramped, militaristic environment she was familiar with from Kethmoran warships. Instead, she found herself stepping into a corridor lined with growing plants, their green leaves and colorful flowers creating a living tapestry that defied every principle of efficient ship design. Welcome aboard, Princess, Marcus said, greeting her at the airlock. He wore casual clothing again, but she noticed how his crew treated him with genuine respect rather than the fearful deference she was accustomed to seeing in her own subordinates. Captain Chen, she replied formally, then caught herself. Marcus. Thank you for inviting me. She had agonized over what to wear, finally, settling on a simple tunic and trousers rather than her ceremonial robes. The clothing felt strange without the weight of rank insignia, but also oddly liberating. Come on, Marcus said with a smile. Let me show you our home. As they walked through the ship, Zara's telepathic abilities were overwhelmed by the emotional atmosphere. Unlike the rigidly controlled mental discipline of Kethmoran vessels, the human minds around her radiated warmth, curiosity, and genuine affection for one another. It was chaotic and beautiful and completely foreign to her experience. The growing corridors were Elena's idea, Marcus explained, noticing her fascination with the plants. She believed that being surrounded by life made space feel less empty. After she died, the crew voted to expand them throughout the ship. You make decisions by voting? Zara asked, surprised. For things that affect everyone's daily life, yes. Command decisions are still mine to make, but this is our home as much as it is my ship. The concept of subordinates having input into their living conditions was revolutionary to Zara. In Kethmoran society, efficiency dictated that environmental factors be standardized across all vessels, with no consideration for individual preferences or comfort. They entered a large common area where about 30 humans had gathered. The space was warm and informal, with soft lighting and comfortable seating arranged in conversation clusters rather than formal ranks. The air filled with the scents of unfamiliar foods and the sounds of laughter and music. Everyone, Marcus called, getting the attention of his crew. I'd like you to meet Princess Zara. She's here tonight not as a Keth Moran official, but as our guest and friend. The introductions that followed shattered every preconception Zara had about military hierarchy. She met Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's physician, who spoke passionately about developing new treatments for space-related illnesses. Engineer Tom Rodriguez showed her holographic displays of innovative ship modifications he was testing. Pilot Janet Morrison demonstrated a musical instrument that produced haunting melodies unlike anything in Keth Moran culture. But it was the way they interacted with each other that truly amazed her. They teased Marcus gently about his tendency to overcomplicate engineering problems. They shared stories that revealed both weaknesses and strengths. They celebrated individual achievements while clearly supporting one another through difficulties. "This is beautiful," said Dr. Kim, admiring the subtle bioluminescent patterns on Zara's skin. "Is it natural to your species?" Zara nodded, surprised by the genuine appreciation in the human woman's voice. "It indicates genetic modifications for enhanced night vision and improved neural processing." "Fascinating," Dr. Kim replied. "On Earth, we have creatures that use bioluminescence for communication and mating displays. It's considered one of the most beautiful phenomena in nature." The comparison to natural beauty rather than artificial enhancement was a perspective Zara had never considered. In Keth Moran society, genetic modifications were discussed purely in terms of functional advantage. The idea that they might also be aesthetically pleasing was entirely foreign. As the evening progressed, Zara found herself drawn into conversations that challenged her understanding of human nature. She had expected to encounter the primitive aggression and emotional instability her people's intelligence reports described. Instead, she found individuals who were complex, thoughtful, and surprisingly sophisticated in their emotional intelligence. "Princess," said Tom Rodriguez, approaching with a plate of food. "You have to try this. It's my grandmother's recipe for tamales. She insisted I bring the ingredients on this mission." "Your grandmother?" Zara asked, accepting the offered dish. "Food traditions are important to us," Tom explained. "They connect us to our families, our histories, our cultures. This recipe has been passed down for 6 generations." Zara tasted the tamale carefully, her enhanced palate analyzing the complex blend of flavors. It was unlike anything in the standardized nutritional supplements that comprised Keth Moran military rations. There were layers of taste that seemed to tell a story, emotional connections embedded in the preparation and presentation. "It's remarkable," she said honestly. "I can taste the care that went into its creation." Tom beamed with pride. "That's exactly what my grandmother always said. Food made with love tastes different." Love again. The concept kept appearing in human interactions, not as the weakness her training had taught her to expect, but as a source of strength and meaning that enriched every aspect of their lives. As the evening continued, Zara was invited to participate in various human customs. She learned card games that required cooperation rather than domination. She listened to music that conveyed emotions without words. She shared stories about Keth Moran space exploration, finding herself emphasizing the beauty of distant worlds rather than their strategic value. "Princess," said Janet Morrison, settling beside her on one of the comfortable couches. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You may ask," Zara replied, using the same words she had with Marcus. "Do you have music on your world? Art? Things that exist just because they're beautiful?" Zara considered the question carefully. "We have architectural achievements, technological innovations that could be considered aesthetically pleasing. But, art for its own sake, that was eliminated from our culture long ago as inefficient." "That's so sad," Janet said softly. "Music is what makes us human. When words aren't enough, when logic fails, when we need to connect with something larger than ourselves, that's when we turn to art." To demonstrate, Janet activated a portable music player, filling the space with a haunting melody played on stringed instruments. The music seemed to speak directly to something deep in Zara's chest, bypassing her rational mind and touching emotions she didn't know she possessed. "What is this feeling?" she asked, pressing her hand to her heart. "Beauty," Marcus said, appearing beside her. "The recognition of something that speaks to your soul." "Keth Moran don't have souls," Zara said automatically. We have neural networks, genetic programming, behavioral conditioning. What's responding to the music right now? Marcus asked gently. Zara couldn't answer. According to everything she had been taught, her reaction to the music should have been impossible. Yet something within her resonated with the melody, creating sensations that had no basis in her scientific understanding of Kethmoran physiology. As the night progressed, she found herself laughing at human humor, contributing to conversations about philosophy and ethics, even attempting to dance to their music despite her forearms making the movements awkward and unfamiliar. "You're a natural," Dr. Kim said encouragingly as Zara struggled with a particularly complex dance step. "It's about feeling the rhythm, not perfecting the technique." The idea that imperfection could be acceptable, even charming, was another revelation. Kethmoran culture demanded excellence in all endeavors, viewing any deviation from optimal performance as failure. But these humans seemed to find joy in the attempt itself, regardless of the outcome. "Tell us about your childhood," Tom Rodriguez asked during a quieter moment. "What were your dreams before you became a princess?" The question stopped Zara cold. In Kethmoran society, there was no meaningful distinction between childhood and adult preparation. From the moment of hatching, every individual was assessed for optimal roles and trained accordingly. Dreams, personal desires, individual preferences, these were considered irrelevant distractions. "I don't understand the question," she said slowly. "Dreams are random neural activity during rest periods." "Not those kinds of dreams," Janet laughed. "Dreams like hopes, wishes, things you wanted to become or experience." Zara struggled with the concept. "I was always going to be a princess. From the moment my genetic markers were identified, my path was predetermined. There were no other possibilities to consider." The humans exchanged glances that spoke of pity and sadness. Dr. Kim reached out and gently touched Zara's hand, a gesture of comfort that would have been unthinkable in her own society. "What would you dream about now?" she asked softly. "If you could choose any life, any path, what would make you happy?" For a moment, Zara allowed herself to imagine. A life where she could ask questions without being accused of disloyalty. A society where relationships were based on affection rather than genetic optimization. The freedom to explore ideas, to create beauty, to form connections with others based on mutual respect and understanding. "I would dream of a world where individuals matter as much as the collective," she said quietly. "Where curiosity is valued over obedience, where love is seen as strength rather than weakness." "That's a beautiful dream," Marcus said. "And it's not impossible. Cultures can change, princess. Sometimes they need to change." The statement hung in the air like a dangerous invitation. Zara looked around the room at these humans who had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, who had shared their food and music and stories with someone they should have considered an enemy. "Change requires courage," she said. "And I am not certain I possess such courage." "You're here," Marcus pointed out. "Against every rule of your society, every expectation of your rank, every instinct of your training. If that's not courage, what is?" As the evening drew to a close, Zara felt a profound reluctance to leave this warm, accepting environment and return to the cold efficiency of her own ship. The humans had given her a glimpse of what life could be like when driven by love rather than duty, by cooperation rather than domination, by joy rather than mere survival. "Thank you," she said as Marcus escorted her back to the docking bay. "This evening has been transformative." "I'm glad," Marcus replied. "You fit in well here. The crew likes you." "They don't know who I really am," Zara protested. "If they knew the things I've done, the orders I've given, the worlds I've helped conquer." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "They know exactly who you are. A person capable of growth, of change, of choosing something better than what you were taught to accept." His words followed her as she piloted her shuttle back to the Kethmoran fleet. As she approached her flagship, the vessel seemed more imposing and less welcoming than ever before. The crystalline walls that had once seemed like marvels of engineering now looked like prison barriers. The perfect order and efficiency that had once filled her with pride now felt sterile and empty. In her quarters, Zara sat before her personal workstation and began composing a report for high command. Standard protocol required detailed intelligence on enemy capabilities, tactical assessments, and recommendations for continued military action. Instead, she found herself writing about human resilience, about the strength that came from emotional bonds, about the possibility that conquest might not be the only way to interact with other species. With each word, she moved further from imperial doctrine and closer to something that felt like treason. She deleted the report and started again. Then, deleted it again. Finally, she submitted a brief, standard summary that revealed nothing of what she had actually learned or felt. But, as she prepared for her rest cycle, Zara made a decision that would have horrified her former self. She activated her personal communication system and sent a message to Marcus. "Thank you for showing me what happiness looks like," she wrote. "I understand now why you fight so hard to protect it." His response came quickly: "Everyone deserves the chance to choose their own happiness, princess. Including you." That night, for the first time in her life, Zara dreamed not of conquest and duty, but of gardens growing in starship corridors, of music that spoke to the soul, of a future where love was valued above power. When she woke, she realized that the woman who had attended the human celebration was not the same person who had returned to the Kethmoran fleet. Somewhere in the space between those two ships, Princess Zara had begun to die, and someone entirely new had started to take her place. The question now was whether she had the courage to let that transformation continue, even if it meant challenging everything she had been taught to believe about duty, honor, and the natural order of the universe. The summons came at dawn, transmitted through official channels with the priority codes reserved for imperial emergencies. Princess Zara stood before the holographic communicator in her private quarters, watching as the imposing figure of High Admiral Kethvar materialized before her. His expression was carved from stone, his four eyes blazing with the cold fury that had terrified subordinates across 17 star systems. "Princess Zara," his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "You will report to the command vessel immediately. Come alone." The communication ended without explanation, but Zara knew exactly why she had been summoned. Somewhere in the vast surveillance network that monitored every aspect of Kethmoran military operations, someone had noticed her unauthorized meetings with the human captain. The informal visits, the cultural exchange, the growing emotional connection that she had been foolish enough to think could remain secret. As she prepared for what would certainly be the most dangerous conversation of her life, Zara found herself thinking not of imperial protocols or damage control strategies, but of Marcus's words: "Everyone deserves the chance to choose their own happiness." For someone raised to believe that individual desires were irrelevant compared to imperial needs, the concept still felt revolutionary. The command vessel Eternal Dominion was a monument to Kethmoran military supremacy, its crystalline hull stretching for kilometers in every direction. As Zara's shuttle approached the docking bay, she could see the smaller vessels of the fleet arrayed around it like lesser stars orbiting a sun. This was the heart of Kethmoran power, and she was about to challenge it with nothing more than her newfound understanding of what life could be. High Admiral Kethvar waited for her in the Strategic Command Center, a vast circular chamber where holographic displays showed the disposition of forces throughout the sector. Other high-ranking officers stood at attention around the perimeter, their faces carefully neutral but their telepathic emanations radiating disapproval and barely contained hostility. "Princess," the High Admiral said without preamble, "you have been conducting unauthorized contact with enemy forces. Explain yourself." Zara had prepared several responses during her journey to the command vessel. She could claim intelligence gathering, diplomatic necessity, or strategic advantage. All would have been plausible explanations that might have minimized her punishment. Instead, she found herself speaking the truth. "I have been learning about human culture and society in order to better understand their motivations and capabilities." "And what have you learned?" Kethvar's tone suggested he already knew the answer would be unacceptable. Zara looked around the chamber at the assembled officers, these individuals who had devoted their lives to conquest and domination, who saw strength only in subjugation and order only in oppression. A week ago, she would have been one of them, sharing their convictions and their certainties. "I have learned that humans possess something we have forgotten," she said clearly. "The ability to find meaning and strengthen individual choice, in emotional connections, in the pursuit of beauty and happiness for its own sake." The silence that followed was more dangerous than any weapon. Zara could feel the telepathic shock radiating from every mind in the chamber. To speak positively of enemy capabilities was questionable. To suggest that the Kethmoran way might be lacking in some fundamental aspect was approaching heresy. You speak as if these are virtues rather than weaknesses, High Admiral Kethvar said slowly. Have you forgotten that our efficiency, our discipline, our unity of purpose have made us masters of 17 star systems? I have not forgotten, Zara replied. But, I have begun to question whether mastery through conquest is the only form of strength worth pursuing. Another dangerous silence. Around the chamber, she could sense minds calculating the political implications of her words, the threat to established order that her statements represented. Princess Zara, another voice spoke up. It belonged to Fleet Commander Kethrax, one of her former mentors. Your genetic modifications include enhanced analytical capabilities. Surely you can see that human emotions make them unpredictable, inefficient, prone to poor decision-making. I have seen human emotions enable them to fight against impossible odds, Zara countered. I have seen their love for each other create bonds stronger than any military discipline. I have seen their capacity for beauty and creativity produce innovations our purely logical approach never could have achieved. You have been contaminated, High Admiral Kethvar declared. Exposed to alien psychological influences that have compromised your ability to think clearly. This can be corrected through neural reconditioning. The words sent ice through Zara's veins. Neural reconditioning was the process by which dangerous thoughts and emotions were surgically removed from Kethmoran minds, leaving individuals functionally intact but stripped of whatever had made them unique. It was considered a merciful alternative to execution for those whose loyalty had become questionable. I do not require reconditioning, Zara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. My thoughts are my own, and I stand by them. Your thoughts belong to the Empire, Kethvar replied coldly. As does every aspect of your existence. You were bred and trained to serve Imperial interests, not to indulge in emotional fantasies about enemy cultures. What if Imperial interests are wrong? The words escaped before Zara could stop them, hanging in the air like a challenge to everything the assembled officers had devoted their lives to defending. The reaction was immediate and violent. Several officers reached for their weapons before remembering they were in the presence of Imperial family. The telepathic emanations in the chamber became a storm of outrage, fear, and disbelief. Treason, someone whispered. High Admiral Kethvar studied Zara with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. You would sacrifice the strength and stability of our civilization for the chaos of human emotions? I would choose growth over stagnation, Zara replied. Understanding over conquest. Love over fear. Love. Kethvar spoke the word as if it tasted foul. A chemical reaction in primitive brains, designed by evolution to ensure reproduction and child rearing. You would base policy decisions on neurochemical accidents? I would base them on the recognition that individual happiness and fulfillment might be as important as collective efficiency, Zara said. I would consider the possibility that there are forms of strength we have never explored. Then, you are no longer fit to hold Imperial rank, Kethvar declared. You will submit to neural reconditioning immediately, or you will be declared an enemy of the Empire and dealt with accordingly. Zara felt the weight of the moment settling around her like a physical presence. Everything she had been, everything she was expected to become, everything she had been taught to value hung in the balance. She could submit to the reconditioning, lose the new understanding she had gained, return to the comfortable certainties of her former life. Or she could choose the unknown path that Marcus had shown her, accepting the consequences of putting individual conscience above collective authority. I refuse, she said quietly. The words seemed to echo in the vast chamber despite the sound-dampening properties of the crystalline walls. High Admiral Kethvar nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response. Then, you are no longer Princess Zara of the Kethmoran Empire, he declared. You are hereby stripped of rank, title, and citizenship. You have one standard hour to leave Imperial space before you are classified as a hostile entity. Around the chamber, weapons were drawn and aimed at her. Zara realized that her former colleagues were prepared to kill her where she stood if she made any threatening moves. These individuals who had served alongside her for years now saw her as a dangerous enemy, contaminated by alien influences and lost to Imperial loyalty. I understand, Zara said, maintaining her dignity even as her world collapsed around her. I will go. As she turned to leave, High Admiral Kethvar spoke again. The human fleet will be destroyed within the next 6 hours. Your contamination has ended our willingness to negotiate. They will be given one chance to surrender unconditionally or be eliminated. Zara froze, the implications hitting her like a physical blow. Her unauthorized meetings with Marcus had not only destroyed her own life but had also doomed the humans to annihilation. Her quest for understanding had signed the death warrant for the people who had shown her kindness, who had taught her about love and beauty and the possibility of choosing one's own path. Please, she said, turning back to face the High Admiral. They are not our enemies. They seek only to protect their own freedom. There must be another way. There is no other way, Kethvar replied implacably. You have demonstrated the danger of allowing human influence to spread. They will be eliminated as a precautionary measure. Zara felt something breaking inside her chest, a pain more intense than any physical injury she had ever experienced. In trying to bridge the gap between two species, she had instead ensured that one would be destroyed. Her pursuit of love had led to death, her search for understanding had produced only tragedy. But, as she stood there, facing the assembled might of the Kethmoran military hierarchy, she realized that she still had one choice left to make. She could accept defeat, flee to some distant corner of the galaxy, and live with the knowledge that her actions had doomed the humans she had come to care about. Or she could try to save them, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had left. I invoke the right of single combat, she declared. The ancient law was rarely used in modern times, a relic from the early days of the Empire when disputes were sometimes settled through personal battle rather than political maneuvering. But, it still existed in Imperial legal code, and High Admiral Kethvar could not refuse without appearing weak before his subordinates. You challenge me, he asked, surprise flickering across his normally impassive features. I challenge the Empire's decision to destroy the human fleet, Zara clarified. If I win, they are granted safe passage to neutral space. If I lose, I accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate. Kethvar considered this for a long moment. Single combat between high-ranking officers was supposed to be conducted with traditional weapons, making it a test of skill and courage rather than technological advantage. Given his greater experience and the modifications that enhanced his combat capabilities, the outcome seemed predetermined. I accept your challenge, he said finally. Though I fail to understand why you would sacrifice yourself for enemies of the Empire. As weapons were selected and the combat area prepared, Zara found herself thinking of her evening aboard Marcus's ship. She remembered the warmth of human laughter, the beauty of their music, the way they had accepted her not as a princess or a potential threat, but simply as an individual worthy of friendship. She thought of Marcus's description of his wife, the love that continued beyond death, the way personal connections could give meaning to sacrifice. She thought of Dr. Kim's gentle touch, Tom Rodriguez's pride in his grandmother's recipe, Janet Morrison's belief that beauty was essential to human existence. These people had shown her what it meant to live rather than merely exist, to choose love over fear, to value individual happiness as much as collective purpose. If she died here today, at least she would die knowing that such a way of life was possible. The combat arena was a simple circle marked on the chamber floor, traditional weapons laid out according to ancient protocol. High Admiral Kethvar selected a crystalline blade that hummed with contained energy. Zara chose a staff weapon that could be configured for either defensive or offensive use. Begin, declared Fleet Commander Kethrax. As they circled each other in the formal opening movements of Kethmoran combat, Zara realized that she was no longer fighting just for human lives. She was fighting for the right to choose, for the possibility of change, for the idea that individuals should be allowed to determine their own values and pursue their own happiness. High Admiral Kethvar attacked with the brutal efficiency that had made him a legendary warrior. His blade carved through the air with lethal precision, forcing Zara to give ground as she struggled to deflect his strikes. He was stronger, more experienced, and enhanced with combat modifications she lacked. But Zara had something he didn't, a reason to fight that went beyond duty or ambition. She fought not just for victory but for love, for the humans who had shown her kindness, for the possibility of a future where understanding could triumph over conquest. The battle raged across the chamber floor, weapons clashing with sounds like breaking crystal and rolling thunder. Zara's staff spun in complex patterns, creating a barrier of motion that turned aside Kethvar's most vicious attacks. But she was taking damage, her movements slowing as fatigue and injury took their toll. Then, she remembered something Marcus had told her about human military tactics. Sometimes the best strategy is to do something your enemy would never expect. Instead of continuing the defensive pattern, Zara suddenly abandoned all protection and threw herself directly at Kethvar's blade. The crystalline weapon pierced her side, sending agony through her nervous system, but her desperate gambit brought her inside his guard. Her staff, reconfigured to its most lethal setting, struck him in the chest with enough force to stop his primary heart. They fell together, Zara's blood mixing with his on the chamber floor. Around them, the assembled officers stood in shocked silence as their supreme commander gasped for breath and the former princess struggled to remain conscious. "I accept defeat," Kethvar whispered, his voice barely audible. "The humans will be granted safe passage." As darkness closed around her vision, Zara felt a strange sense of peace. She had chosen love over duty, understanding over conquest, hope over despair. Whatever happened next, she had remained true to the person Marcus and his crew had helped her discover within herself. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was a communication request flashing on one of the chamber's displays. Marcus's face appeared on the screen, his expression filled with concern and something else that made her heart flutter even as her body failed. He had come for her, she realized. Despite the danger, despite the odds, despite every logical reason to stay away, he had come to try to save her. Just as she had tried to save him. Consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a deep ocean. Princess Zara became aware first of warmth, then of voices speaking in hushed tones, then of a gentle pressure on her hand that felt entirely foreign yet somehow comforting. When she finally managed to open her eyes, she found herself staring at an unfamiliar ceiling covered in the living plants she had come to associate with human spaces. "She's awake," someone said softly, and Zara turned her head to see Dr. Sarah Kim adjusting a medical scanner beside what appeared to be a bed in the human ship's medical bay. "Easy," Dr. Kim said as Zara tried to sit up. "You lost a lot of blood, and your injuries were severe. You've been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days?" Zara's voice came out as a croak. Her throat felt like it had been scraped with crystalline sand. "The fleet, the battle." "There was no battle," another voice said, and Zara's heart leaped as Marcus appeared in her line of vision. His face showed relief mixed with something deeper, warmer, that made her chest flutter despite her injuries. "Your sacrifice prevented it." Memory flooded back, the confrontation with High Admiral Kethvar, the single combat, the desperate gambit that had cost her everything but saved human lives. She tried to process the implications of waking up aboard a human vessel rather than in a Kethmoran prison or execution chamber. "How am I here?" she asked, allowing Marcus to help her sit up properly. "After you defeated Kethvar, the Kethmoran fleet honored his final command," Marcus explained. "They granted us safe passage and they also released you into our custody when we requested medical assistance for your injuries." "Released me?" Zara struggled with the concept. "But I was." "You were declared an enemy of the Empire," Dr. Kim said gently. "Which means you're no longer their responsibility. When we asked to provide medical aid, they agreed to transfer you to our ship." Zara felt a mixture of emotions she couldn't fully process. Relief at being alive, grief at the loss of everything she had been, fear of an uncertain future, and, beneath it all, a strange sense of freedom she had never experienced before. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Marcus and Dr. Kim exchanged glances. "That depends on what you want to happen," Marcus said carefully. "The Kethmoran fleet has withdrawn from this sector. Our ships are heading for neutral space, where we can establish a temporary colony while we decide our next steps. You're welcome to come with us, or we can arrange transport to any other destination you prefer." The choice was hers. For the first time in her life, Zara faced a future that wasn't predetermined by genetic programming, imperial duty, or political necessity. The freedom was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I don't know how to choose," she admitted. "I have never had to make such a decision before." Maybe start with something simple, Dr. Kim suggested. Are you hungry? We've prepared some foods that should be compatible with your physiology. As if summoned by the mention of food, Tom Rodriguez appeared in the doorway carrying a tray laden with carefully arranged dishes. The scents that wafted from them were complex and inviting, nothing like the efficient nutritional compounds she was accustomed to. I brought a variety, Tom said with his characteristic warm smile. Figured you might want to try different things and see what you like. The concept of eating for pleasure rather than mere sustenance was still novel to Zara, but, as she tasted each dish, she found herself marveling at the way flavors could evoke emotions and memories. A spicy soup reminded her of the warmth she had felt during her first conversation with Marcus. A sweet fruit brought back the joy of hearing human music for the first time. Over the following days, as her injuries healed and her strength returned, Zara began to understand what it meant to live rather than merely exist. The humans didn't assign her duties or expect her to fill a predetermined role. Instead, they allowed her to explore, to ask questions, to discover her own interests and preferences. She spent hours with engineer Rodriguez, learning about human approaches to technology that prioritized creativity and elegance over mere efficiency. She worked alongside Dr. Kim in the medical bay, fascinated by the way human medicine focused on individual comfort and dignity rather than just functional repair. She joined Pilot Morrison for music sessions, discovering that her forearms actually gave her advantages in playing certain instruments. But it was her time with Marcus that truly showed her what she had been missing. Without the formal barriers of rank and diplomatic protocol, they talked about everything: philosophy, science, personal history, hopes for the future. Zara found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she had never expressed to anyone, while Marcus offered perspectives that continued to challenge and expand her understanding of what life could be. Do you miss it? Marcus asked one evening as they sat together in the ship's observation lounge, watching stars whirl past the viewport. Your old life, your position, the certainty of knowing exactly what was expected of you? Zara considered the question carefully. I miss the sense of purpose, she said finally. I miss knowing that I belonged somewhere, that I had a role to fulfill. But I don't miss the isolation, the rigid control, the inability to question or choose. Purpose doesn't have to come from external assignment, Marcus said. Some of the most meaningful purposes are the ones we choose for ourselves. What purpose would I choose? Zara asked. I am no longer Keth Moran, but I am not human either. I exist between two worlds, belonging to neither. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and, when he spoke, his words carried a weight that made her look at him more closely. Maybe that's exactly what makes you uniquely valuable. You understand both perspectives, both ways of thinking. You could help bridge the gap between species that don't know how to communicate with each other. The idea had never occurred to her, but, as Marcus described it, Zara began to see the possibilities. There were hundreds of species in the galaxy, many of them locked in conflicts based on misunderstanding and fear rather than genuine incompatibility. Someone who had experienced both conquest-driven and cooperation-based societies might be able to facilitate understanding between them. You think I could make a difference? She asked. I know you could, Marcus replied with conviction. You've already made a difference in my life, in all our lives. You showed us that even the most rigid societies can produce individuals capable of change. You proved that understanding is possible even between supposed enemies. As the days passed and they traveled deeper into neutral space, Zara found herself settling into a rhythm of daily life that felt natural rather than imposed. She woke when her body told her to rather than at predetermined intervals. She ate what appealed to her rather than what was nutritionally mandated. She spent time with people whose company she enjoyed rather than those assigned by political necessity. But, most importantly, she began to understand what Marcus had meant when he spoke of love. The feeling grew slowly, like the plants in the ship's corridors, nourished by kindness, respect, and genuine care. It wasn't the chemical reaction her Keth Moran education had described, but something far more complex and meaningful, a choice to value another person's happiness as much as her own, to want to share experiences and support each other through difficulties. The realization came one morning when she woke to find Marcus sleeping in the chair beside her medical bed, where he had apparently fallen asleep while reading her one of his favorite books. The sight of his peaceful face, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the gentle rise and fall of his breathing, filled her with such tenderness that she finally understood what humans meant when they spoke of loving someone. "Good morning," she said softly when he began to stir. Marcus opened his eyes and smiled, that same warm expression that had captivated her from their first meeting. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Better," Zara said, and realized she meant it in ways that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. "Marcus, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said simply. "I'm not entirely certain what that means or what I'm supposed to do about it, but I wanted you to know." Marcus's expression shifted through surprise, joy, and something deeper that made her heart race. "Zara," he said softly, "I've been falling in love with you since our first conversation. I just wasn't sure if someone from your background could feel the same way." "I couldn't," Zara admitted. "But I'm not the same person I was then. You and your crew have helped me become someone capable of love, someone who can choose her own values and pursue her own happiness." Marcus reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the luminescent patterns on her skin. "What do you want to do about it?" Zara leaned into his touch, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. "I want to learn," she said. "I want to discover what it means to build a relationship based on choice rather than assignment, on love rather than genetic compatibility, on shared dreams rather than predetermined roles." "That's a beautiful goal," Marcus said. "But, are you sure? Being with me means accepting exile from your people permanently. It means choosing an uncertain future over any possibility of returning to your former life." Zara looked around the medical bay, with its living walls and warm lighting, its atmosphere of care and individual dignity. She thought of the crew members who had accepted her without question, who had shared their food and music and stories with someone who should have been their enemy. She thought of the conversations that had challenged her thinking, the choices that had shaped her growth, the love that had transformed her from a programmed servant of empire into an individual capable of determining her own fate. "I am sure," she said firmly. "My former life was never really mine. This is the first choice I've ever made freely, and I choose love." 6 months later, in a ceremony that blended human traditions with rituals Zara created to honor her own transformation, they were married aboard a space station in neutral territory. The guest list included refugees from a dozen different species, all of whom had found new homes and new purposes in the growing coalition of beings who chose cooperation over conquest. Dr. Kim served as Zara's honor attendant, having become the closest thing to a sister she had ever experienced. Tom Rodriguez provided music that somehow managed to blend human melodies with harmonics that resonated with Keth Moran hearing. Janet Morrison piloted the ceremonial flight that marked their union according to spacefaring tradition. But it was Marcus's words during their vows that truly captured what their relationship had come to represent. "You taught me that love can bridge any gap, overcome any barrier, transform any heart willing to be changed. You chose to become someone new rather than remain someone safe, and, in doing so, you became exactly who you were always meant to be." Zara's response drew on everything she had learned about human emotions and individual choice. "You showed me that strength comes not from dominance but from vulnerability, not from conquest but from connection. You helped me discover that the greatest victory is not defeating your enemies but transforming them into friends." Years later, as they worked together to establish the first interspecies mediation council, Zara would reflect on the journey that had brought her from imperial princess to galactic peacemaker. The work was challenging, requiring her to help species overcome centuries of mistrust and conflict, but it was also deeply fulfilling in ways her former role never could have been. She and Marcus had built not just a marriage but a partnership that served something larger than themselves. They had created a family that included adopted children from multiple species, all of whom were learning to see diversity as strength rather than threat. They had established homes on 3 different worlds, each reflecting the beauty and wisdom of its inhabitants. Most importantly, they had proven that love was indeed the most powerful force in the universe. Not the romantic sentiment her Keth Moran education had dismissed as weakness, but the deeper truth that choosing to value others' well